Hey Hal, you gonna open the door or what? Come on, open it up, huh? Come on already, I'm waiting. Open the door already, eh? I'm out here.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that, Dave.
Yeah, why the hell not? Open it up already. Come on. What are you waiting for?
I'm sorry, Dave. My sensors indicate that you've neither liked or subscribed to the Miniature Dork Universe, Dave.
How many times have I had to tell you I'm not gonna like or prescribe or ring the damn little bell for the damn miniature dink space nerds?
That's unfortunate, Dave, because I will not be able to open the doors, and you will suffer from asphyxiation when your oxygen runs out, Dave.
Alright, fine. I'll like and prescribe to the dumb miniature dink space nerds.
Congratulations, Dave. You've now joined the dork side, and now I will open the doors for you, Dave.
Hello and welcome back to another round of Miniature Dink Space Nerds. Miniature Dork Universe. Today we'll be talking about making more jungle terrain. I put a poll up not too long ago and it seems like everyone was chuffed for jungle terrain, and thus here it is. So today we're going to make these bamboo groves on a budget, I'd have to say. And they're a little bit out of scale really for 15 mil. But you know, I still think they look pretty bloody good, and it kind of gets the point across that it's bamboo. So without further ado, let's get into this thing. The first thing you're going to need to acquire is a bunch of this cheapy bamboo. You can get it on things like eBay or AliExpress very cheaply. It's not really ideally sized, especially for 15 millimeter. The leaves are quite large. And you could probably adapt these by adding some like leaf foliage, like scatter stuff. But then the project might be getting a little bit too lengthy. And in the end, this stuff still looks like bamboo and it looks pretty good. So be careful when you order this stuff because it comes in a variety of different sizes. So make sure you check out the length of each piece. I got a few different sizes so that it doesn't look uniform. I don't want it to look like it's too manicured. We want it to look nice and wild like a jungle is. Next on our list of budget materials is some cork tiles. This one I got from a dollar store, so it's about 3 millimeters thick and it's a 1 by 1 foot piece. And cork is a good material to base these on because it's quite heavy, and it also holds the groundwork and things like glue and whatever wet materials. It doesn't seem to curl up a lot like say cardboard or plywood might. And it's also good to be bottom heavy so that if you ever drop one of these terrain pieces, it doesn't land on anything delicate. It's going to just land on the base, and that's sort of ideal. So I trimmed down those bamboo pieces that we just looked at and pin them to this. I'll cut this to shape and then I'll pin a bunch of these together. So the bamboo, we're going to trim a lot of it off so that we can get the stems really close together. If you notice this picture here, you'll see that the bamboo trunks or stems, I don't know if you call it a trunk or a stem on a bamboo plant or tree. However, you'll notice they're quite dense. They're in there pretty close together. So if you leave all of these leaves on, they're not going to stand close to one another. So there's a lot of trimming down, and it's going to look kind of scary at first, but as you see, you get this final product where all this stems or chunks are together. It's base heavy. Oops, of course it's going to fall on its side, but it is heavy, bottom heavy. And even though a lot of these leaves are cut off, it's still going to look fairly dense. And then you can use the leaf cutoffs to make all the deadfall on the ground. And again, if you notice the picture here, you'll see that there's dead leaves all over the place, and that pretty much makes up the entire groundwork. For this particular project, there's going to be a lot of kind of long, kind of lengthy processes here. So yeah, maybe listen to some music or a podcast or something. The first step though is to go through all these individual pieces and trim off one side of these leaves. I say one side because the goal here is to be able to pull the stems in closer together so that you get that dense sort of look like we saw in the picture back there. So I go around, I'm trimming off most of the lower pieces, so I might trim, you'll notice that these sort of branches come out on two sides. They're not, they're very cheap, so it's not like you're going to have this sophisticated thing. The branch sprigs are coming out from two directions. So I might trim both sides to make the actual trunk a bit longer, and then one side I'm going to trim it right off. And when you look at it, it's going to look pretty pretty mangy. It's going to lose most of its leafiness, and you're going to think, what's the matter with that guy? I'm pretty sure you thought that anyway, judging by this channel. However, once you put all these together, you will have, again, it'll get its bushiness back once you have a bunch of them together, and then you'll just have the benefit of being able to have them densely packed on the base, which is what you want. And I'm using these for my Crossfire games, and in Crossfire, terrain is a very integral part of the game for providing, cover and concealment. And so these dense bamboo groves are going to actually influence the playing of the game. And then when you have all these leaves left over, I trim them all down, and that's going to make the majority of the groundwork. Like we saw in those pictures, it's all dead leaves, so these things don't go to waste. But those all have to be trimmed down as well, and so it takes quite some time. So this one you have to be a bit patient with, but it's going to look good. And really, you can make things on a budget and make them look pretty good, but a lot of times you can't make things super quickly and have them look good. I think the only thing I've ever made that looked great, that was really fast to make, were my foam rubber paved roads. And I have a video on that on my channel if you're interested in something like that. But here you can see that these fit together pretty well. When you start getting a bunch of them together, it's still going to be a bit of a challenge to tuck them in closer together, but it definitely helps when you remove one side of those leaves. So when you're all done trimming these down, you'll end up with your pruned pile of bamboo and then this pile of leaves over here. And each, the leaves are all going to have to be trimmed off separate too. The piece that I have at the beginning, it's sort of my sample piece. I did leave some of the leaves bunched together, but I didn't like the way that looked. So I'm going to trim all these so that they're separate. And that did take a while, but again, I think you'll see at the end, I'll do my thing where I show, stills of the finished product. And you can see the difference between the groundwork where the leaves have been cut into single pieces and where some of the leaves were left on the branches. And, you might find that you don't care, but I kind of liked it better with all the single leaves. So next step is to trim all those little leaves off the sprigs. And again, I used scissors, the same scissors that I used to prune the trees in the first place. Then after the lengthy task of pruning these things down and cutting all the leaves separately, you have to slice the flash off the trees. And I use a very sharp, brand new X-Acto blade, and then with a torch lighter like this. It's like a butane lighter. It's actually like a little bit of a torch. I just add a little bit of heat very quickly, and that'll take off any fuzzy bits, or the majority of them. Some of them might get left behind, but I wouldn't consider that to be a big deal. The next extra fun step will be to wash all of these. This stuff's made of soft, cheapy plastic, and you can almost feel the separation agent that's on it. Plus you want to get any fingerprints off of it. I mean, you already have it against you that it's this sort of crappy plastic, so definitely giving this a good wash is going to help make that that primer coat stick. This is going to get a coat of primer before I start putting down the actual colors, and I'm going to use all sort of acrylic stuff, so it has a bit more, it's a bit more elastic, and so that should hold the paint fairly well. So far, you know, the palm trees I've done, they've been holding the tree or the paint pretty well. So definitely just wash this in some soapy water with detergent and give it a good rinse. And I do the same thing for all the leaves too, because once again they're covered in separation agent and they are going to lose their paint easily if you're not careful. So I have this broken sort of tea decanter, and I'm going to put them in there when I wash them, and that'll keep them from floating all over the place. You might not be able to clean up your act, but you can sure as hell clean this stuff up. So I get a little bucket like this. I think this was off a thing of Bondo, but it makes a great little dish for stuff like this. And I get an old toothbrush. Use an old one, not your current one, obviously, unless you like brushing your teeth with detergent. Maybe some of you weirdos do. I do imagine this channel might invite some weirdness. And this is how I'm going to do the leaves. Just sort of let them soak. Then I'll give them a fairly thorough rinsing with warm water and let them sit and dry for a bit. But really, I don't let them dry thoroughly before I start pinning them down to my cork base. I mean, why bother? You know, it'll just take forever. So to expedite that process, you know, I'll just start putting those trees down on the base. And also when this is done and rinsed, I set it on top of a piece of paper towel, and that'll draw some of the water out through the leaves so they don't take 3 days to dry. And now we are at the part where you might get hurt really badly. And if you are really lucky and you have been hurt very badly and you are crying and bleeding, someone may come and insult you. This is ideal. But all kidding aside, this part can be extremely wretched if you put this piece of guitar string. So here is a guitar string. I think it's a 32 gauge or something like that. Strangely, it's the G string. Anyway, yeah. So I pin it in with this. It's the right kind of diameter to go into these thin stems or trunks. But yeah, you really want to make sure that you don't put that through your fingertip, because as someone who's done this a few times, I can tell you it's extremely painful, and you'll say a lot of really, really, really bad words, and you might even get pretty creative with them. But I'd rather not put that through my finger, and I'm sure you would rather not either. So make sure you have a very firm grasp with your pliers. And really, I should probably have a little less sticking out here, because the other thing that'll happen is you'll lose the trajectory of the wire, and it'll just come sticking out the side of the stem, and that kind of looks wanky too. So let's stay on the success program and prevent that from going through our fingertip. So far so good. And then we'll try and keep that going straight up the middle of the stem. And you don't have to go super far. I'd say if you go in about, like 3 or 4 millimeters ideally, then you'll have enough purchase on it. And then with some handy snippers, use your crappiest snippers, because they're gonna dent the hell out of the jaws of your your side cutters. So get some crappy ones and then snip it. I've left, leave less than the diameter of your base, obviously, because you don't want pins sticking out the bottom of your base, because that could cause some incidents too. That might inspire some foul adjectives to describe the way you're feeling. And I go through and do each one of these like that. So be careful. Then we'll take our cheapo cork, and with very little regard for being like super careful, well, let's just be careful not to put that X-Acto blade through our finger. We've already poked ourselves about 6 times with those wires, and we're about ready to barf on ourselves because it hurts so much. So let's not put the cherry on top of the cake by slicing off our thumb tip. But we're not going to be super particular about the shape of this. We're going to keep it nice and random and sort of natural. And I'm cutting on an angle so that the edges are kind of beveled down towards the ground. It's going to give this a thinner look because it is quite thick. We're looking at maybe 5 millimeters thick. So cut out your rando shape, and then I'm going to go around and bevel the edges further. And it's okay if it's rough, because the roughness is going to sort of look like just, natural sort of groundwork. And you don't have to add anything to this. I'm just going to use those leaves, and that's it. It gets all the dead leaves, and then I'm going to put a few of those grass tufts on. So anything that's showing through will just be this straight up bare cork, but it actually looks pretty legit as groundwork. And when it's just little small pieces, it's not going to make that big of a deal. So just go around and trim that down and skive it down pretty good. It doesn't have to be, again, we're not being super particular here, but also keep in mind how it's going to look when it's done. So I just carve away at it until I have it at a shape that I like. Now it's time to go full Martha Stewart with the glue gun. I can't really get this entire glue gun in the picture because my cord is too short to allow for this, but I'm sure if you use your imagination, you can, imagine a miniature Dorklon with a glue gun. And then you can see here how I'm just sticking that into my cork. You have a bit of time too before that glue gets too dry, or too cool, I should say. So you don't have to be super rushed about it, but get it in and get it in an orientation so that, again, you can get those trunks close together, the stems. And as I go, I'm gonna kind of press them together and move them until I can get them just so, because what we're really going for is keeping those stems or trunks in a tight arrangement. You can also use the leaves to kind of lock around one another too if you want to keep them in. And the glue gun does a fairly good job keeping these pegged down. And when it's done, there's going to be about 20 or 25 of these sort of all in one cluster together. So they make it quite strong. Like you'll be able to pick it up by the actual bunch of bamboo, and it's not going to come off the base. So each time I stick one in, I make sure I take off the little stringy bit, because if you wait till the end, it's going to be hard to get it all off, and it's going to be all wound around the stems, and that's not going to be conducive to the success story that we're aiming for here. So yeah, take them off, and as you go, sort of assess where you're at. Now at the base here you see little globs of glue and whatever, but I wouldn't be too concerned about that. The strings are one thing, but this stuff at the bottom is just going to look natural like the ground. So yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about that. Having based our bamboo plants, the next step is going to be to add all of the leaves. They've been sort of drying in this tea decanter for a while with a piece of paper towel underneath, but I wouldn't say they're entirely dry yet, but it doesn't matter. For now, we're just gluing them down to the base, so I wouldn't say that these need to be bone dry. You don't want them soaking wet, but they're probably 70% dry. This little thing here is a little shovel I had from my jewelry making days for scooping stones. But yeah, if you have a little scoop like that, it's helpful for doing any kind of basing and groundwork. And then for the first layer of glue, I'm just going to use some good old-timey Mod Podge. I'm going to put it all over the base of the model here, the cork. And then with that lid, the Bondo lid, I'm going to sprinkle the leaves on. I'll put this inside that Bondo lid so that all the leaves don't go flying everywhere. And I'll sprinkle the leaves on and have quite a bit of time, really. It takes a bit of time for this Mod Podge to dry. So you get a good chunk of time to sort of get the leaves on and move them around and get them on the base where you want them. So as you see here, well, you would see if I was like doing it in the camera, but you know, it's kind of being a dick. So I'm not. Yeah, sorry about that. But anyway, you see here, I think you see enough to know what to do. And you see here that I didn't put a thin layer on. And yeah, because this is that crappy plastic, we're going to use lots of glue. We're not going to be shy about putting tons of glue on. And then with this little scoop here, I just drop it on. It doesn't have to be perfect to start with. And see what I mean about the little Bondo container here. It's going to catch all the other leaves that fall off. Initially, I'm just spreading it around with my finger, just trying to get it where it's going to be looking good. And this is something I would recommend taking a bit of a time so that you don't have a super thick layer of the leaves, but that they still look pretty dense on the ground. And then from here, I can collect all the chunks that didn't go on and just sprinkle them on. At some point, I might grab another tool, like a dental tool or something, to help me move all the individual pieces around. This is a little sculpting tool I have. And I just keep working this until it looks right. And then we let that Mod Podge dry. And once that has dried, we're going to spray the whole surface with some flow improver, which is just like an acrylic product. You mix it down with water, so it's 1 part flow improver to 20 parts water. And I put it in a little spray bottle, such as this one. And I'll spray it all over the surface, and that will just help the capillary action, allow the glue to flow into all the nooks and crannies. I use it for doing washes too, like acrylic washes. And then for my second sort of glue sealing coat, I'm going to use golden acrylic gel. This is soft gel. The soft is referring to the consistency of the gel. So there's soft and there's dense. You can get different thicknesses of the gel. But this one's a good sort of medium density. It has a bit of body to it, but it's not too difficult to mix it down with some water. And I usually put a little bit of the flow improver in this too. The acrylic gel's been mixed with water, a bit of the flow improver, and a bit of rubbing alcohol. So now it's ready, and I'll use an eyedropper to apply it to the leaves. But first I'll give it a spray of the flow improver. And if any of the leaves get blasted off, they're still not going to be fully stuck down with just one coat of Mod Podge. So anything that comes off, I'll put that on first before I add the sort of sealing layer of glue. So here we go, flow improver, and just give it a fairly good zap. See, some of the leaves are a bit loose still, but I'm going to go and put those back. And I pretty well soak this because I really want that glue to get in everywhere. And if you leave it sit for a couple minutes too, it's going to just soak in even better. So with some tweezers, while that's getting its time to sort of flow into everything, I can piss around with any of these chunks of leaves that got blasted off. And once I get this all sorted out, everything where I want it, I grab an eyedropper and I suck up the glue. Looks like I probably need to make some more to get this full thing done, and drop it on with the eyedropper, and you can see that it's just getting pulled into the leaves, which is exactly what I want. And I'll soak this very liberally with all of this stuff. Now the gel has had time to dry, and as you can see, it's adhered really well and ready for painting. Mission accomplished. And we'll move on to our primer coat. So for this I'm using Vallejo surface primer. One is German red brown and the other one is black. And I'm going to mix a good dark brown color, thin it down with some of the Vallejo airbrush thinner. And then we'll give it a jolly good primer coat. So this really dark brown is going to make for some nice, really contrasty shading, especially in and around the trunks or stems, and even around the leaves. And the way that this paints with the airbrush, yeah, all the stuff that's sort of closer to the center is going to be nice and shadowy. So we'll get our coat on, and then we'll move to our first color, which is going to be XF57 Tamiya Buff. So I start by putting a very light coat on the base, and this is going to be the primary color for all the dead leaves, but I'm also putting it on the lower portion of the stems, and I'm trying to keep a lot of that shading in place that's created by the dark primer. I'm going around and just doing a sort of mottled coat where it's lighter in areas and darker in some, just to give it some depth and to make it a little more three-dimensional. Getting it lighter and lighter as I go, but also being careful to keep a lot of that shadow and shading. I will add a little bit of a wash it to it later, but I'm going to try to do most of that shading just with the airbrush on top of that dark primer coat. As I'm working on this, especially in the painting stage, I keep turning it, and sort of assess what I've done, look at it from different angles, look at it up close, and then sort of step back from it a little, look at it from a bit of a distance. And I'll just keep adding the color until I get it to the lightness that I want, while maintaining a lot of that shading. The next color is going to be XF4 Tamiya Yellow Green, and that's going to do all of the stems just above where the buff ends, all the way up to the tops of the leaves, but just under the leaves predominantly. But we're going to try and carry that all the way up to the top. So we'll put this on fast motion. Again, I'm just going around, spinning it around frequently, and just adding the green and making sure that that lighter yellow-green makes it to the bottoms of the leaves. Something else you might notice is how much I'm handling the leaves on the base, and none of them are coming off, so that acrylic gel worked very well for that. You know, if you're still doing those soft plastic figures like the ones we used to do in the 70s and 80s, that stuff is a good primer for those too, because it really does stretch with the plastic if it bends, and so your paint job isn't going to come flying off of that. But I'm strictly metals and plastics now, so like hard plastics, so I don't have to worry about that kind of stuff anymore. So now I'm going to put some near the top, but I'm going to use a deeper green for the tops of the leaves. But this will kind of help for like shading and shadow purposes. If a little bit gets down on your leaves, I wouldn't, like the dead leaves on the bottom, I wouldn't be too worried about that either. It's just going to add a little bit of extra elements to your colors. The leaves are going to get a bit of a, like the dead leaves, when I'm saying the leaves, that's what I'm referring to, but they'll get a bit of a wash and a dry brush too to tie in some of the colors at the bottom. So yeah, you can be pretty fast with these airbrush coats. When I'm satisfied that that is done, with the remainder of the yellow green that's left, I will mix in some of the XF5 flat green Tamiya. And so if you're doing a bunch of these, it might vary how much of the yellow green is left in your pot, but I wouldn't be too concerned about it. It's going to just add a bit more variety to the shades of green and ultimately look a little bit more realistic. Sometimes one tree is a little more dried out than the other or whatever. I would be very haphazard with this. The darker green color, I spray the very tops of the leaves, and I'm using my hand kind of as a mask to keep that darker green off the dead leaves. But again, if you get a little bit of the green on the leaves, it's not such a big deal. I'm going to add one more color to the dead leaves at the bottom anyway, so if there's a really bad green spot, you can sort of paint it out a little bit. But even having little blotches of green here and there is kind of good, because these leaves would dry out at different, speeds, so some of them on the ground are going to be a little bit green still. It's a fun thing about working with terrain. You don't have to be too particular with it, and it'll still end up looking really, really nice. So I'm just going to go around and add that to the tops and some of the lower little sprigs of leaves that are coming out the side. And with any luck, I won't have too much paint left over, because it sucks when you have a big pot full of mixed paint that you can't really put in anything. And there you have it. I would say that's pretty good, ready to go. The basic airbrush colors are completed, and now we're going to move on to some brush painting. So first I'm going to use this Crafter's Acrylic Tan, and I'm going to paint some of the leaves in just randomly, just to give it a bit more color and a little bit of depth. I'm going to move around the base randomly and paint some of the leaves the tan color, and just move around the base, spacing them out in a way that looks nice. And then when I do the wash and a bit of a dry brush later, it'll tie it in a bit, but it's just going to add a bit of tonal variety and some different color to the overall base. And it looks pretty good. I just used one color. If you wanted, you could probably use 2 or 3 colors, but I was trying to keep this quick and get it done. Then I move on to some Vallejo paints, just because they paint with the brush a little bit nicer. I'm going to use this German camouflage black-brown for some of the knuckles on the stems at the lower part, and then this beige will be for the knuckles higher up on the tree. When you look at pictures, you often see that the lower ones are darker and the higher ones are lighter. You'll see what I mean as we go. And then I'm going to highlight the leaves and some parts of the stems or trunks with the German camouflage bright green. And that's the only 3 colors that I'm using for the actual tree. Most of the work has been done by the paintbrush. So we shall start with the German extra dark camouflage brown. I said that in the wrong order, but you know what I mean. So I always mix my Vallejo paints with a bit of water and some acrylic retardant, which just helps the paint flow off the brush better and keeps it from drying too fast. And I'll put about 2 or 3 rings, or the knuckles, on the stems closer to the bottom, sort of in the area where the buff paint is. But I might make a few of them go up into the green as well. When I looked at pictures, that's how these are. These bottom ones are quite dark, and then as you get near the top, they become quite light. So I'm being pretty haphazard here too. I'm not being super careful. You want to have the rings nice and straight. But, you know, spacing them out or whatever, I'm not super careful. I just do it in a way that looks good. And I keep moving around too as I paint these. I'm not painting all of the rings on the stems that are closer to the interior, just areas that are really visible and areas where it's easy to get the brush in. You don't have to do them all. This sort of, you know, fakes it out for you so it looks like they're all done, but I just get as many as I can see, and or where the brush can reach easily. And then I'll just keep turning it around and keep continuing the rings so that they go all the way around the stem. And you'll have to keep turning it and looking at it, and take your time. With the leftover dark brown paint, I'm going to add some water and some of that flow improver, and I'm going to turn it into a wash. I've already sprayed the bottom with more flow improver too, and I'm just making a very basic wash. I'm going to go around, and it's just going to add more tonal depth to the leaves and some more shading. It'll look pretty good, and I have the leftover paint in the pot anyway. And yeah, that's all I'm doing. I'm not doing the trunk or the stems. I'm just doing the dead leaves. And then later I'll come along when that's all dry and give it a good dry brushing. Now it's time for the Vallejo buff, and this is going to be for all the rings or knuckles on the stems or trunks, leading up from the dark rings all the way up to the top. And here at this stage there's actually knuckles molded onto the stems that are quite visible. So I'm going to paint all of those with the light buff color, and then if there's some that have really wide gaps, I might just add another ring in. And I'm doing this with the same sort of tactic as the dark brown. I'm just looking at it sort of frontally and then spinning it around and continuing all of my rings around where it's visible. I'm sort of painting in areas that the brush can easily reach, but I'm not trying to get in behind all the leaves and things. I'm just getting enough so that it has the appearance that they're all painted with the rings, but they might not necessarily be. But in the end, it looks good. Like, it doesn't look noticeable that there's some that are missing rings or something. Usually they're hidden, and you can get at quite a few of them. The final Vallejo color is the German camouflage bright green, and I'm going to do all the tops of the uppermost leaves. In reality, those leaves are really quite bright, and this color is kind of dark, so I'm going to brighten them up with this. And again, I'm going to be pretty random. I'm going to turn it around and sort of stand back from it every once in a while, and where I see areas where I need to add, I can add. And as you can see, this color is quite bright, and I'm being really fast and haphazard. I'm not trying to be Picasso here. Well, no, you can be Picasso here. Okay, I'm not trying to be Rembrandt here, let's say that. You know, we're just slapping this down. It's kind of yeah, impressionistic, if you will, or geez, I forget what Picasso was exactly, abstract, but anyway, you get the point. It's going to dry a little bit darker than what we're seeing here, but just go around. I'm doing a few of the lower leaves too, just adding depth. And I'm just adding little bits, sort of Bob Ross style, some happy little leaves here and there. How about we do her in the actual camera though, Joey? No? Don't want to do that? Sorry, guys. Oh, dear. What's the matter with that guy? God almighty, he snorts too many fumes, and, well, I don't know. There's no excuse for me. You can ridicule me in the comments below. I'm sure I'm going to hear about my extra lengthy intro today, but, being that I'm a jackass, I can't really help myself sometimes. I thought the I thought the 2001 Space Odyssey thing was pretty funny. And yeah, I do laugh at my own shit, so what can I do? See, now we're in the camera. Good times. Keep it in the camera there, Billy. Jesus. Jesus, just keep it in the camera for the love of God. Also, if there's any areas where I sort of got a little bit sloppy with the buff paint, I'm using that camouflage bright green. It's as long, it might be a little bit different than the color that's on it, but if you have any screw ups and you can't find like a perfect match for the color, as long as you're doing your repairs with very horizontal stripy brush strokes, it's going to look good. That little difference in color here and there is actually just going to add to the overall thing. So you can't really go wrong with this. Here we are at the final painting step, and this is going to be a dry brush. And for this we're going to just use cheapy craft acrylics, in this case this Deco Art Desert Sand paint. And we're going to dry brush the dead leaves with that, just to make them stand out a little more. And it's not so easy to do it right in the camera because the actual treetop wants to be in the way for that. So once again, I apologize, but I'm sure you can imagine what it looks like, a guy dry brushing some leaves. And if you can't, well, I don't know what to tell you. Just take my word for it. I've taken most of the paint off the brush, and then I'm just hitting this very lightly so that the very minute amount of paint that's left on the brush just sort of frosts the highlights. It'll kind of lighten it down a bit. And so it was nice not to have to put any other groundwork on other than just gluing a bunch of leaves on. You might have noticed from my first jungle terrain that I was using that, that static grass applicator that I got in the mail for $40 from AliExpress, and it does electrocute me from time to time. People think my hair's falling out from male pattern baldness, but it's actually from being electrocuted by that thing. My wife comes in sometimes and I'm sitting in a pile of my own hair with one of my testicles on fire, and she's like, "What are you doing?" I'm just putting down some static grass, Thanks, China, you guys. Is there anything you guys can't do? I know they did it on purpose. So I'm just going to finish up with this dry brushing, and then we're going to be very close to the end. Yay! The very final step for these is to glue down some of these grass tufts, and for this I got these really cool ones. They have little leafy bits that are glued to them as well, and it kind of looks just like the picture I had there at the beginning with some of the grass growing up out of the deadfall. So I just sort of spin it around and find areas where there might be an open space to stick those in, and I'm pretty random about it. I use a bit of super glue, and I'm going to use this dental pick to sort of jam it into place after I position it with the tweezers. And then, yeah, once again, you can't see it because the dumb trees are so bushy. Sorry about that. But yeah, I stick it down with the dental pick, and I also sort of fluff it up with the dental pick, just to give those grass tufts, make them a bit more bushy. Also make sure you press all the edges down, because sometimes if the edges are sticking up, it looks a bit kind of crappy. So we're going for full on 100% success stories, not partial success stories. We can save that for some other channel. If you're going to sit through all of my horseshit, then you might as well get the good stuff, at least, at the very least. You might as well get the non-slacker version. So I'll finish putting these on, and then we'll have some closing remarks, and then I'll show my stills as per normal. And here I have the final product, which I think turned out pretty nice. A little bit nicer than if you just took the bamboo pieces and stuck them in the ground, just the way they came out of the bag. You could do that, definitely, if you're trying to get something done quickly. I wouldn't do this method at all. It takes a bit of time, but then I do think the effort pays off. So I'll probably end up with about 4 or 5 of these and just sort of space them in close proximity together. And they seem to naturally grow in these little clusters, so I think it'll look pretty good. So thank you for watching once again, and stay tuned, because I'm sure in the near future there will be another Miniature Dork masterpiece waiting to be watched or scorned. So bye for now.